Few people know that. In the chaos of World War II, one of the most heroic acts on the battlefield wasn't carried out by a soldier, but by a dog. Not a myth, not a story told by veterans to comfort themselves, but a real event recorded in the field reports of the WW2 Army's K-9 Corps. It happened on a cold morning in 1944, somewhere in the shattered countryside of France. A Marine scout handler named Corporal Frank Williams lay bleeding beside a dirt road, his leg torn open by machine gun fire. The patrol he was leading had been ambushed, and chaos erupted in every direction, shouts, gunfire, and smoke thick enough to choke the sun. And beside him, half hidden behind a burnt-out Jeep, stood his partner, a 70-pound German shepherd named Rex. The dog's ears were flat, his eyes fixed on his fallen handler. He could smell blood, his human's blood. Bullets snapped through the air, cutting leaves, biting into the dirt, whining over the ground like angry hornets. Frank tried to move, but his leg refused to answer. He reached for his rifle, then for his radio. Both were out of reach. The pain was overwhelming, but the fear of what was coming next was worse. He could hear enemy voices getting closer. And then something happened that no one would believe if they hadn't seen it. Rex crawled forward low, steady, ignoring the gunfire until his nose touched Frank's shoulder. The Marine whispered something, just one word, and Rex seemed to understand. The dog clamped his jaws around the strap of Frank's web belt and began to pull. At first, it seemed impossible. A full-grown man, wounded and armored, weighing more than the dog himself. The ground was muddy, the air alive with bullets, and every second felt like eternity. But Rex didn't stop. Inch by inch, foot by foot, he dragged his handler toward a shallow ditch at the side of the road. Machine gun bursts kicked up dirt all around them. Shrapnel hissed past. A bullet grazed Rex's flank, but he didn't make a sound. He kept pulling, his muscles trembling, paws sinking deep into the mud, teeth locked tight on the strap. Frank's vision blurred. The only thing he could see clearly was the dark outline of his dog moving ahead, the tail low, the body tense with effort, the unspoken determination of a creature that refused to leave him behind. When they finally reached cover, Frank collapsed. Rex stood over him, chest heaving, eyes scanning the field as if daring the enemy to come closer. The patrol's medic would later write in his report, "The handler owes his life to the animal. The dog refused to abandon him, even under direct fire." It was one paragraph in an official military document, dry, concise, without emotion. But behind that line was something far greater than duty. It was loyalty in its purest form, the kind only a soldier's dog could show. What drove an animal to crawl through hell to save a man? Instinct, training, or something deeper, a bond that even war couldn't break. This is the story of Rex and Corporal Frank Williams, a team forged in the mud and blood of France, a partnership that began like any other handler and dog and ended as one of the most extraordinary tales of courage ever recorded by the U.S. Marine Corps. And as we dive into their story, remember, Invar, not every hero walks on two legs. Rows of kennels lined the muddy field, filled with barking, restless shapes. These were not pets. They were soldiers, four-legged recruits of the U.S. Marine Corps K-9 program. The year was 1943. America was deep into World War II, and the Marine Corps had begun experimenting with using dogs for patrols, sentry duty, and search operations. They called them war dogs, trained not just to attack, but to think, to detect danger before men could, to hear what human ears missed, and to guard what humans couldn't see in the dark. Among hundreds of dogs that arrived from homes across the country, farm dogs, police dogs, even family pets donated for service, one stood out. A lean, dark-coated German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a quiet disposition. His name was Rex. Rex had belonged to a 17-year-old boy from Ohio who volunteered him to the war effort. His owner's note, found in Rex's file, read simply, "He's smart, loyal, and brave. Please take care of him and let him help." From the first day, Rex showed something different. He didn't bark for attention. He watched. He learned When trainers threw metal cans or simulated explosions, he didn't flinch. When they ordered stay, he stayed until told otherwise, no matter how long. That quiet obedience caught the attention of one Marine instructor, Corporal Frank Williams, a 24-year-old scout from Kansas who had volunteered to join the K-9 Corps after losing half his squad in Guadalcanal. Frank was quiet too, the kind of man who said little but saw everything. When he first met Rex, the dog didn't jump or bark. He just sat tail still, eyes fixed on Frank, waiting. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something quieter, older recognition. From that day forward, they were a team. Training was brutal. Dogs and handlers ran obstacle courses under live fire, crawled through trenches filled with smoke, and endured night drills in pouring rain. They learned hand signals, scent detection, and silent movement. A single mistake could mean death in the field, so training left no room for hesitation. Rex was exceptional. He learned to crawl silently beside Frank, to freeze at the faintest whiff of gunpowder, to react to the motion of a raised hand instead of a shouted command. Within weeks, the instructors nicknamed him the Shadow because wherever Frank went, Rex followed, silent and invisible. By spring of 1944, both were deployed to Europe. Their assignment? Serve as a scout team for the 3rd Marine Division, attached to advance patrols clearing small villages and wooded areas in northern France. The Normandy landings had just begun, and chaos reigned across the countryside. Roads were clogged with wrecked vehicles and burning farms. Snipers haunted every hedgerow. Every step forward could mean walking into an ambush or a minefield. For the Marines, that meant fear. For Rex, it meant purpose. He could smell the metallic tang of explosives buried deep underground. He could sense the faintest rustle of movement long before men could see it. And when danger was near, he would stiffen, tail straight, ears high, and Frank knew to stop. In his field reports, Frank wrote, "He saved us more than once. Sometimes it's like he knows before the enemy even breathes." At night, when the squad rested in abandoned barns, Rex would sleep beside Frank's boots, head resting on the man's pack, always half awake, always listening. The bond between them was no longer that of a soldier and his dog. It was the bond of two beings who had learned to survive together. Yet war has a way of testing loyalty. By late autumn, their unit was assigned to Operation Cobra, a push through heavily defended farmland near St. Lo. The Germans had fortified every road, every hedge, every field with machine guns and artillery. On the morning of July 26, 1944, Frank's patrol was sent ahead to scout a narrow lane bordered by thick hedgerows. It was quiet, too quiet. Rex's ears flicked, nose twitching. Frank felt the tension in the leash. That silent warning only handlers understand. But before he could signal the squad to stop, the world exploded. Machine gun fire erupted from both sides. Men dove for cover. Dirt and leaves rained down. Frank felt something slam into his thigh. Hot, sharp, like being kicked by a horse made of fire. He fell hard, clutching his leg. Rex barked once, a deep, violent sound that cut through the chaos and then disappeared into the smoke. Frank's last clear memory before losing consciousness was the sound of that bark, fierce, defiant, alive. When he awoke, minutes later, the battlefield was silent except for the distant crack of rifles. And that's when the impossible began. Rex, wounded, bleeding, had returned to him. The air still trembles with the echo of gunfire. The hedgerows are torn open, trees split by shells, and bodies, both friend and foe, lie scattered in the mud. Corporal Frank Williams was still alive, but barely. He had crawled as far as his body would let him, maybe 20 feet, before the pain in his leg made him collapse. The wound was deep. Blood soaked through his pants and pooled beneath him. Dark against the dirt, he tried to move again, gritting his teeth. His rifle was gone. The rest of the squad had pulled back. The Germans were closing in, and somewhere between the smoke and the dead branches, his dog was gone. "Rex," Frank whispered, but his voice broke. He reached for his sidearm, hand trembling. He'd made peace with the thought of dying, but not like this. Not alone. The minutes crawled. Every sound became a threat. Every breath burned like fire in his lungs. Then a rustle. A shape moved through the smoke, low to the ground. For an instant, Frank thought it was an enemy soldier creeping closer. But then he saw the outline, the sloped shoulders, the lowered head, the glint of metal on a collar tag. It was Rex, muddy, bleeding, limping but alive. He came crawling through the dirt toward Frank, dragging something behind him. It was the strap of Frank's torn backpack. He dropped it beside his handler, tail flicking weakly, chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Frank wanted to shout, to push him away. Go back. Get out of here. But Rex didn't move. The dog nudged Frank's shoulder, whining softly, a sound that cut through the chaos more than any scream. It wasn't fear, it was insistence. And then the gunfire started again. The Germans had spotted movement. Bullets shredded the hedges around them. Dirt exploded inches from Frank's face. Rex flinched but stayed. He looked back at Frank, eyes wide, waiting for a command. Frank whispered the only thing that came to mind. Help, boy, help. It was barely a word, but for Rex, it was enough. He bit down on the strap of Frank's web belt and started to pull. The pain made Frank's vision blur, but he felt himself moving inch by inch, scraping through the mud. Rex's muscles strained, paws clawing into the ground. Every pull was a struggle against the weight of his own exhaustion and the hail of bullets slashing the air around them. A round tore into the dirt beside them, close enough to pepper Rex's flank with splinters. He stumbled, whimpered, but didn't stop. He turned his head once, checking that Frank was still alive, then lowered himself again and pulled harder. Frank tried to help, pushing with his one good leg, gasping with every jolt. He could see the shallow ditch ahead, safety, maybe 30 feet away, but to reach it, they had to cross open ground. Come on, Rex, just a little more, he groaned. Then, another burst of fire. Rex froze, dropped to his belly, ears flattened. The air above them screamed with lead. Frank reached out, his hand brushing the dog's neck, the warmth of life, the steady pulse that hadn't given up. When the shooting paused for a heartbeat, Rex moved again, faster this time. Desperate, silent, he reached the ditch's edge and with a final heave, pulled Frank over the lip and into the muddy cover. Frank fell onto his back, gasping, his vision dark around the edges. He felt something warm press against his arm. Rex, panting hard, one paw still resting on his chest, as if to say, "We made it." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Above them, the enemy shouted orders, searching the field. A grenade exploded somewhere nearby, showering dirt over their bodies. Frank reached for his field radio, hoping it still worked. Static. Nothing. He turned to Rex. The dog's fur was wet with blood. He'd been hit in the shoulder, a small wound, but deep. Frank tore off a strip of his sleeve and pressed it over the wound, whispering hoarsely, "Good boy, hold on, you did it." Rex's tail thumped once in the mud. When the medic team finally reached them hours later, guided by another patrol, they found the two together, man and dog, lying side by side in the ditch. Rex had refused to leave, even when soldiers tried to carry Frank away first. He growled at anyone who got too close, standing guard over his wounded handler until he was lifted onto the stretcher too. The report written that night was brief. Handler rescued under fire. Dog displayed exceptional courage. Both evacuated. No fanfare, no headlines. Just another note lost among thousands in the chaos of war. But for those who witnessed it, it was unforgettable. A moment where instinct became loyalty, and loyalty became heroism. That day, Rex wasn't just a war dog. He was a Marine. The air smelled of disinfectant, blood, and rain-soaked canvas. Outside, trucks rumbled over muddy roads carrying the wounded back from the front lines. Inside, rows of stretchers lined the floor, each holding a story that might never be told. Corporal Frank Williams lay on one of them, pale, bandaged from hip to ankle. The bullet had shattered his femur, but the medic said he was lucky. Lucky that he hadn't bled out. Lucky that someone, or something, had dragged him to cover before he did. He turned his head toward the corner of the tent. There, lying on a blanket beside his cot, was Rex. The dog's shoulder was wrapped in gauze, his fur still matted with dried mud. Every breath came out in a low, rough exhale, but his eyes, those sharp, amber eyes, followed Frank everywhere. Whenever a medic approached, Rex's ears perked, muscles tense, ready to protect. "Easy, boy," Frank whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "We're safe now." Rex's tail flicked once against the blanket, a faint, almost invisible motion. But that small gesture meant everything. The doctors were amazed. They said it was impossible for a dog to pull a man his size across the battlefield, especially under fire. But every Marine in the patrol who survived confirmed it. Rex had gone back into the killing zone twice. The first time to find Frank, the second time to drag him out. The camp commander came by later that day, a hard man, the kind who'd seen too much to believe in miracles. He stood at the foot of Frank's cot, hands on his belt, staring down at the dog. "This your partner?" he asked. Frank nodded weakly. "Yes, sir." The commander crouched beside Rex, watching the slow rise and fall of the animal's chest. "Hell of a Marine," he muttered. "We'll make sure he's recognized." 2 weeks later, Rex was still recovering, but word had spread through the division. Soldiers would stop by the medical tent just to see the dog that had done what even a man might not have dared. Some brought bits of jerky, others scraps of bread. But Rex never strayed far from Frank's side. Then, one morning, Frank woke to the sound of boots, dozens of them lining up outside. The flap of the tent opened, and sunlight spilled in, casting long shadows across the cots. It was a ceremony, a small, quiet one, no flags, no cameras, just men who'd seen enough death to know the value of survival. The battalion stood at attention. In the center, a medic read the citation aloud, for exceptional courage under direct enemy fire, resulting in the rescue of his wounded handler. The war dog Rex is hereby commended by the United States Marine Corps for conspicuous gallantry and devotion to duty. The soldiers clapped softly, not like a parade but with reverence. Frank, sitting upright on his cot, tried to salute. His hand trembled halfway up before falling back to his lap. Rex looked up at him, confused by the noise, then wagged his tail once slow. Uncertain, the commander stepped forward, knelt, and placed a small bronze medal on Rex's collar. It wasn't official. War dogs weren't supposed to receive decorations, but no one cared. In that moment, every man in the tent knew they were witnessing something pure, something war hadn't yet managed to destroy. Frank smiled faintly. "You did it, buddy," he whispered. Later that night, when the camp went quiet, Frank sat awake, listening to the rain tapping against the canvas roof. He reached down, fingers brushing the dog's collar, the cold metal, the small engraving of his name, Rex. For the first time since the ambush, he allowed himself to think about what had really happened. The chaos, the noise, the pain, and through it all, that one shape moving through the smoke, refusing to leave him behind. There were no words for what he felt. Gratitude didn't seem enough, because in war, survival isn't just luck. It's the result of someone or something choosing to stand with you when everyone else runs. Months later, when the division moved again, Rex was cleared for duty. His wound had healed into a small scar under his shoulder blade, a mark of loyalty burned into his skin. Frank could have requested reassignment. He could have stayed behind. But he didn't. He signed up to return to the front with Rex beside him. They were inseparable. Through every patrol, every night in the mud, every whispered order under the moonlight, the two moved as one shadow. Soldiers said you could always tell when their patrol was near because Rex never barked. He just watched, always watching. By war's end, they had survived more than a dozen engagements. When the order came for demobilization, Frank filled out one final request form. It was short, only one line. Request permission to adopt service dog Rex after discharge. It was approved, and in 1946, both man and dog returned home together, back to a world that would never truly understand what they'd been through, but one that was quieter, gentler, and finally, peaceful. The war was finally over. The guns were silent. The ships had docked. The flags were folded. But for many soldiers returning home, the silence was louder than the battle ever was. Corporal Frank Williams stepped off the train in his hometown of Wichita, Kansas. He was thinner now, walking with a slight limp, his legs still weak from the wound. But beside him trotted Rex, tail low, eyes scanning the unfamiliar world with quiet alertness. People stared. A German shepherd in a Marine collar walking beside a veteran in uniform, it was a sight that turned heads in every station and street. Children waved. Old men took off their hats. One woman whispered, "Is that the dog from the papers?" Because by then, word had spread. The war dog that saved his handler under fire had become a story carried in small military newsletters and local newspapers. Not front-page headlines, but the kind of quiet story people remembered. The kind that made them believe, even for a moment, that decency could survive the war. For Frank and Rex, life didn't return to normal easily. There were nights when Frank woke in a cold sweat, hearing gunfire that wasn't there. Sometimes, when a car backfired in the street, Rex would bolt to his feet, hackles raised, eyes wild, the old instincts snapping back like a switch. They were both veterans of a world that no longer existed. Frank tried working again at a grain mill first, then as a delivery driver, but every evening he would take Rex to the edge of town, where the wheat fields stretched endless and golden under the setting sun. There, the two would walk in silence. No orders, no fear. Just the wind and the sound of Rex's paws brushing the dirt road. Neighbors said it was like watching two ghosts learning how to live again. Sometimes, local schools invited Frank to speak about his time in the Marines. He didn't talk about battles or glory. He talked about Rex, about the morning in France when everything went dark, and how a single dog refused to let him die. And every time he told it, he would pause, look down at the dog sleeping at his feet, and say softly, "I didn't save him. He saved me." The bond between them became something sacred. Frank never married. He said once, half jokingly, that he didn't have room for anyone else because Rex had already filled that space. They lived together in a small wooden house near the outskirts of town, where the sound of trains in the distance reminded them both that the world kept moving forward even if they didn't. Years passed. Rex grew older, the black in his coat slowly turning gray around the muzzle. He couldn't run as fast, couldn't jump as high, but his eyes still held that same steady intelligence. Frank built him a small wooden bed near the fireplace, and every night, Rex would curl there, one paw over his nose, always facing the door. One winter morning in 1951, Frank woke to find Rex lying still, his breathing shallow. He knelt beside him, hand trembling as he stroked the fur that had once braved gunfire and mud. Rex's eyes met his calm, gentle, and for a moment, it felt like that morning in France all over again. Only reversed. Now it was Frank's turn to say goodbye. "It's all right. Buddy," he whispered, "you can rest now. You've done your duty." Rex closed his eyes. His tail moved once a slow, final flick, and then went still. Frank buried him under an old oak tree behind the house. He placed the bronze medal on the wooden marker, carved only one word above it, Rex. For a long time, Frank visited that tree every morning, sitting beside the mound with his coffee in hand. Sometimes he talked, sometimes he didn't, but he always stayed until the sun rose high enough to turn the fields from gray to gold, the same color as Rex's eyes. To anyone passing by, it was just a man and a grave. But to Frank, it was everything that had ever mattered. Because in the end, wars aren't remembered by the battles, but by the souls who refuse to abandon each other in them. A Marine kneeling beside a German shepherd, both looking straight at the camera, tired, scarred, but proud. It was taken in 1944, a few weeks after the battle near St. Lo. For decades, that photo sat quietly in a dusty archive box at the Marine Corps History Division, unremarkable until someone opened it again. By the 1960s, America had entered another war, Vietnam, and with it came a new generation of military dogs and handlers. The Marine Corps revived old K9 manuals, searching for lessons from World War II. Among them, they found Rex's report, filed under Combat Incident, Canine Unit C2, July 1944. The file was short, almost sterile, a few lines of typed text, and a brief note by an officer. Dog demonstrated independent rescue under live enemy fire. Handler survived. Recommend commendation. But behind those dry words lay a story that began to inspire soldiers decades later. In training camps across America, instructors told recruits about a nameless German shepherd who refused to leave his wounded handler. The name Rex wasn't even mentioned. At first, he was just called the war dog, a symbol of what the bond between man and dog could become when tested by hell itself. In 1967, when the U.S. Army formalized its Canine Corps doctrine, many of the rescue and loyalty protocols were modeled after the early Marine experiences, including Frank and Rex's. Their teamwork became an example in training lectures, described as a textbook display of instinct meeting discipline. Young handlers would sit on the training fields, their dogs panting beside them, listening as instructors told the story of the German shepherd who crawled through gunfire to save a Marine. Most didn't know the handler's name. Fewer still knew that the man Frank Williams was still alive, living quietly in Kansas. He never sought attention. But one afternoon in 1970, a young Marine sergeant, newly assigned to a K-9 unit, found his address and wrote a letter. "Sir, I wanted to thank you. I'm training a dog, now his name's Duke. They told us the story of the war dog that saved his handler in France. I just wanted you to know, every time I look at Duke, I think of him, and I think of you." Frank never replied, but he kept the letter folded neatly beside Rex's old collar, in a wooden box near his bed. Years passed. The world changed. Wars came and went, but the legacy of those early K-9 units endured. By the 1990s, the Marine Corps had begun honoring their war dogs, officially memorializing them at bases and monuments across the country. And when one such monument was unveiled at Camp Lejeune, the same base where Rex had once trained, a small brass plaque at the bottom bore an inscription dedicated to the war dogs of World War II, to those who served, saved, and never asked why. Frank was too old to travel by then, but when he saw the photo in the newspaper, he smiled faintly. There, among the sculpted bronze figures of dogs and handlers, was one shape that looked just a little familiar: the tilt of the ears, the stance of readiness. "Looks like you, old boy," he murmured, tapping the image with a trembling finger. He passed away in 1998, at the age of 78, when neighbors entered his home to arrange his belongings. They found a simple wooden box on the mantel. Inside was Rex's collar, the medal, and that same photograph creased, faded, but carefully preserved. Beneath it, a handwritten note in neat block letters. "He was more than a dog. He was my brother." That note was later archived by the Marine Corps Museum. Today, it rests behind glass in the National War Dog Memorial Exhibit in Quantico, Virginia. Visitors often pause there longer than anywhere else, not for the weapons or medals, but for that single photo, because it captures something words cannot. Not victory, not power, but devotion, quiet, unyielding, and timeless. Modern K-9 handlers still tell Rex's story. Before their first deployment, they learn about him during orientation. The instructors remind them, "You're not just holding a leash, you're holding a life that would die for you." And when asked why they serve, some handlers simply answer, "Because once a dog named Rex showed us what it meant to be loyal." His name isn't carved into Arlington stones, nor listed among the fallen. But every time a military working dog leads a patrol, sniffs out danger, or refuses to leave a wounded soldier, Rex lives again. He exists in every heartbeat that races under fire, in every pair of eyes that refuses to turn away, and in every silent act of courage that no one sees. Because some heroes don't wear helmets. They wear fur, scars, and an unbreakable heart. Tall grass moves gently in the wind. In the distance, a single oak tree stands, the same tree under which Rex rests. The camera lingers, silent, only the sound of wind, birds, and the faint echo of distant thunder, like memories that never truly fade. Narrator's voice, low and steady. History remembers wars through the names of generals and the dates of battles. But sometimes, history hides its truest heroes in four paw prints pressed into the mud. Rex was one of thousands of war dogs who served during World War II. They guarded airfields, carried messages through shellfire, sniffed out mines, and sometimes gave their lives for the men beside them. Most never made it home. Some were left behind, buried on distant fields that no one would ever visit again. But their loyalty never vanished. It lives in the quiet bond between every soldier and every dog that has ever stood by him, from Normandy to Iraq, from jungles to deserts, from one generation of warriors to the next. For Corporal Frank Williams, Rex was not just a companion. He was a reminder that even in war, when humanity seems lost, something pure can still survive. Something that refuses to surrender, even under fire. Frank once said in a rare interview, years before his death, "I saw courage in that dog that I wish I'd seen in myself." He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He just came for me. There's no medal big enough for that kind of love. No parade loud enough to match that silence on the battlefield. When one soul decides another's life matters more than its own. The camera shifts, black and white photos fade in and out. Handlers and dogs in helmets. A soldier crouching beside a shepherd in the mud. A paw print in bloodied soil. A Marine saluting a grave marked only by a collar tag. Then, color slowly seeps in green fields. Modern K9 units training. Handlers laughing as their dogs chase through obstacle courses. The world has changed, but that same invisible thread loyalty still runs from past to present. Today, at the National War Dog Memorial, fresh flowers are often found at the base of the statue. No one knows who leaves them. Sometimes it's an old veteran. Sometimes a child who once heard the story of a dog named Rex, and maybe that's enough. Because remembrance doesn't need monuments. It needs hearts that refuse to forget. A black and white photograph, a name carved in wood, and a promise that some heroes will never be forgotten. The narrator's tone softens. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that courage can come from the unlikeliest of places, then share it. Let the world remember that among the countless names lost to war, there was once a soldier with fur, a dog who dragged his wounded friend to safety, one painful inch at a time. So the next time you see a service dog, a police K9, or even your own pet resting by your feet, remember Rex. Because behind every loyal heart beats the echo of those who once served. Silently, faithfully, without ever asking why. In VAR, not every hero walks on two legs. Some crawl through fire and never look back. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a like, subscribe, because the more people who hear them, the fewer heroes time can erase.